One of the best things that Amy and I did as young parents, this is way before 7 kids was even, a thing in our minds or a thing in our lives, is when we sat down, we began to talk about the end. What do I mean by the end? I don't mean like the end of their life, but what I mean by the end is we begin to think and pray and really dream about what did we want our kids when they left our home. What kind of characteristics did we want them to carry with them? What did we want them to look like when they moved out of our house and they become a part of, the world around them, and mom and dad aren't there to kind of guide in that sense, and be a part of their lives, as parents. Because all kids grow up and they move out of the house, and that's just how it is, and that's the way it should be. And so one of the things we did is we talked about what we wanted our kids to look like. And so we started with the end in mind. So this idea gave shape to our early parenting conversations. It gave shape to what we wanted our kids to be. And what we decided, what we came away with, is we wanted our kids to be a blessing. So when they were in our home and we're with them, throughout the day, we want them to care about certain things. When they were younger, first-time obedience was really important to us. And as they get older, of course, we teach them how to reason and how to have conversations with mom and dad. But, especially when they're little, when you say something to them like, hey, stop, you don't want them running out in the street. So first-time obedience, we didn't want to argue with them. We didn't have to, sit down and try to really, hey, would you do what we want you to do? And so we talked about that. We talked about, consistency. And there were some things that were really important to us on our parenting journey. So by starting with the end in mind, we had to figure out what kind of parents we needed to be to see those kinds of results. What kind of vision would become necessary, to see them when they move out of the house, or when they go to someone else's house and they spend the night at a friend's house, or they're at school, when they're in our home, when they're in somebody else's home, where they're a blessing to the family and to others. I use this as a lead-in example of the importance of thinking about the end. Thinking about what we want our lives to look like years from now. Because the end matters. The end matters. In Numbers chapter 13, we're told that Joshua and Caleb, that they were among 12 spies who went to spy on, someone help me out, Canaan. 10 were bad and 2 were good. Right? How many of you grew up singing that song? Have you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, a couple of us, 12 men went to spy on Canaan. 10 were bad and 2 were good. Yeah. Anyways, so 10 were bad and 2 were good. But Joshua and Caleb, they were part of this chosen group of people that were sent to kind of get a feel for the land. God had promised them a land. And he said, hey, this is the land I'm giving you. And so they were sent in to kind of spy it out, get a feel of what it was like. And the reality is, though, is that 10 came back and gave basically a report of, man, there are giants in the land. There are too many obstacles. But Joshua and Caleb, they were the only ones who stood out from the 10 and said, no, we can do this. I don't care how big the obstacles are. If God said, if God had promised us this, then we're going to go in and we're going to possess the land. We're going to go and possess the promise of God. But what you'll find there in Numbers is that the people were swayed by the 10 voices. They were overwhelmed by the voices of doubt and unbelief. They were overwhelmed by those voices that said, nope, the giants are too big in the land. There's no way we'll go in and possess this promise. So of the 12, only Joshua and Caleb believed what God had said about a land of abundance. Joshua and Caleb, they saw something different. They saw opportunity. Think about this. After spending 430 years, now that's a long time to live in slavery. Israel was in slavery to the Egyptians for 430 years. So after spending 430 years in Egypt as slaves, the Hebrew people, after coming out, remember Moses leads them out of slavery. They cross the Red Sea. From that point on, it says that they spend 45 years, they spend over 40 years wandering in the desert. So somewhere between a promise and slavery They wandered. They wandered in this place between slavery behind them, a promise in front of them. They wandered in this place of in-between place for 45 years. And here's the reality, that the people, they just couldn't see what God had said. They couldn't get their minds around what God had promised. And so as a result of that, many died in the wilderness during those 45 years. Of the 12 that went in to spy on Canaan, only Joshua and Caleb, after those 45 years, were allowed to enter into the promise. Why? Because they saw something different. While some longed for what they knew in Egypt and what they were comfortable with in Egypt, Caleb and Joshua, they saw something different. They saw with eyes of faith. Listen to what Caleb had to say after wandering the 45 years in the desert. In Joshua 14, 11, and 12, he says, "I am still strong." This is Caleb's testimony of himself 45 years later. He says, "I am still as strong today as I was in the day of Moses, when the day that Moses sent me. As my strength was then, so my strength is now, for war and for good, going out and coming in. Now then, give me the hill country about which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day that Anakim were there with great fortified cities. Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I will drive them out as the Lord has spoken." Notice his words. I'm just as strong today as I was then. Now give me that promise. I want that promise. Here's what I think happened. I think Caleb never lost sight of the promise. Those 45 years of wandering in the desert, he never lost sight of what was ahead. There was something he was clinging to. There was something he was holding on to. There was something that was motivating him, driving him. He was determined to see that promise, to be a part of that promise. Caleb believed the promise of God. Caleb saw something. So he never lost sight of that promise. Even in the wilderness, he refused to deter from what he saw, what he believed, what he hoped for. Even when those around him said it could never happen, there was something in him that said, yes, I believe it can. Now I want to ask you, what do you see for your life? Have you ever thought about what your life will look like down the road, 10, 20, 30, 40 years? Does it give shape to your reality today? Does it help to shape and inform where you're at and determine what kind of person you want to be so that you can see that fulfilled years down the road? What do you dream about? What do you think about? It seems to me that in life, now I'm just going to speak generically. Now, there are many seasons and times that you and I struggle, right? But there are at least three, that I think are really interesting moments or intersections in our life. And those three are when you're a teenager. The other one is when you hit midlife. And the other one is when you're thinking about retiring. Because I really believe the temptation is, in those three interesting moments, what will I do with my life? Will I live for me? Is this all about me, pleasing me, doing what I want to do? Giving myself to the things that give me pleasure and bring me joy and make me somebody. How many know what I'm talking about? Okay, I'm in that midlife. Okay, you experience that. What do I want my later years to look like? They're not so far away anymore. Am I going to live for God or am I going to live for myself? Am I going to give myself to His interests, or am I going to live just in the middle of my interests, what I want, what I see, what I need? So I think there's a strong pull to abandon a life devoted to Jesus in the midst of those years, to be distracted from what God wants to do in and through us. Because the reality is, listen, don't get mad at me, but if you're living for God, if you're in relationship with Jesus, you never retire. Right? You may retire from a job, you retire from an opportunity, but you don't disconnect from mission. You don't disconnect from this reality of living, abiding, being in Christ. And so I see myself being just as passionate 40 years down the road as I am today. And what that does, though, is it enables me, right? To stay focused enables me to stay on track. Because if I don't see myself being that way 40 years down the road, then it's easy to get sidetracked. It's easy to say, okay, you know what? I gave 65 years of my life to ministry. I was a pastor. Now the next 35 years or whatever, they're mine. Now I get to go do whatever I want to do. And I think that there's something different that God has called us to. So it's in those years we really have to figure out who we're going to be, who we're going to live for. Again, am I going to live for me, or am I going to give myself to something bigger, something greater? So when you think of a few years down the road, let me ask you again, what do you see? What do you think of? What do you dream of? Do you dream of travel? Do you dream of the call of Arizona and the easy life? Or do you see yourself living out some of the most meaningful and fruitful days of your life when you're a teenager, when you're in your midlife crises, and when you're a little bit further on down the road? Do you see yourself living out some of the most meaningful, fruitful days of your life? I hope you do. Do you see that? Can you see that? When I was 20, I could never see myself doing anything than what I'm doing now. Right? There's no way, I'm going to retire and I love what I do. And then you kind of hit this point in your life. You're like, I could see myself retiring. I could see myself, not dealing with, all the stuff that comes with ministry and people as much. But the reality is, yes, I may do something different with my life down the road. But I'll never retire from this reality of being in relationship with God, right? Being a part of people's lives, calling people to go deeper in their walk and their relationship with Jesus, to go to deeper places, to grow and to be a part of what God's doing today. That will never change. The testimony of Caleb is that he was different. Numbers 14:24. Listen, it says this. It says, but my servant Caleb, because he has had a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring him into the land which he entered, and his descendants shall take possession of it. So think about this. Stuck between slavery and a promise was Caleb. Stuck between slavery and a promise was Caleb, and he entered in that promise because of three things. He had vision for down the road. He saw something down the road. Not only did he see something down the road, but it says he had a different spirit and he followed God fully. Those three things are important. He had vision, he had a different spirit, and he followed God fully. Hebrews 12:1 again says that since we are surrounded by people like Caleb, a great cloud of witnesses, Caleb's, people that live with vision, right? It says, since we're surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. Again, the idea of traveling light. So like Caleb, what if you and I learn to cut ties with a few things? So as we bring this series to conclusion here today, there are three things that I want to just emphasize that I think that we need to cut ties with so that you and I can travel lighter. The first thing is this: cut ties with a lack of vision. Right? We want to be people who cut ties with a lack of vision. Ephesians 4:21 and 22 says, if indeed you have heard him and have been taught in him, just as truth is in Jesus, that in reference to your former manner of life, you lay aside the old self, which is being corrupted in accordance with the lusts of deceit. Here's the reality. If you are a follower of Jesus today, then you have a point of intersection between the old you, the old life, and the new life. And that day, that intersection point represents the day you decide in your heart, I'm going to follow Jesus fully. That day represents an intersection point between the old life and the new life. And here's the thing, there's new in front of us and there's old behind us. Paul said, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. Right? So there is new in front of us. But here's the reality. Yes, we're new creatures, we're new people, we have a new life. Right? We're following Jesus. But here's the reality with that is the old still follows us into the new. We don't entirely, just like that, abandon the old life, the old person, the old habits, the old ways of thinking, the old ways of seeing life and people, and all the stuff that goes with it. Those things follow us into the new. How many understand that? How many of you ever experienced that? Where you're really excited about making a life change and you make that life change and you're thinking different and maybe you've been thinking different for a while and only to have that thing, that the way you used to think about certain things, the way you used to see people, all of a sudden it creeps back in and you're like, where did that come from? I thought I'm new. I thought I'd been changed and transformed. Well, the reality is, yes, we are changed and transformed. We are being changed and being transformed. It's a lifelong process, but along the way, there's the old still following us. Still there, still present. Sometimes we leave the old behind only to have it creep in different points and in different ways. This is why having vision for the kind of life that Jesus says we can have, why it's so important. Because the old wants us to fall back into its ways. The old wants us to cling to what we used to cling to and to have appetites for those things we used to have appetites for. The old thinking wants us to be focused on ourselves, right? To be narcissists in the greatest radicalist sense, where all we're consumed and concerned about is ourselves. That's what the old desires. And then the new comes in and we're reminded, and Jesus says things like, pick up your cross and follow me. But there's this old that follows us into the new. So this is why having vision for the kind of life that Jesus says we can have is so important. It keeps us focused. It keeps us moving forward in the direction of new. Of the new. Without vision for the new life, it's easy to get discouraged. How many know what I'm talking about? Right? If we don't have vision for what we see in the future, what we want to be, the character we want to have, what we believe Jesus is shaping and forming us to be, when the old creeps in, we can get discouraged. We can get frustrated. Some people walk away. They just like, man, I can't do this. And so they walk away. They quit. They throw in the towel. They stop pursuing Jesus. It's too hard or it's too whatever. So having a vision, it keeps us focused. It keeps us from getting off track. It keeps us from settling. Right? It doesn't matter if we're young or we're older. We don't have to settle for status quo. We don't have to settle for where we are currently in our walk and relationship with Jesus. There is more that He wants to do in us. There's more that He wants to awaken in us. We know in part, we prophesy in part, we don't fully know. And so what is our pursuit? Our pursuit is to know Him more fully. Not to just settle with, okay, I guess this is far. I've gone as far as I can go. I know all that I'm going to know. I've experienced all that I've experienced. No, there's so much more. Colossians chapter 3. I love Colossians. Colossians 3, 1 through 10. It says this, just listen to this. It says, if then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth. For you died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, appears, then you also will appear with Him in glory. Therefore put to death your members which are on earth, fornication, uncleanness, passions, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. Because of these things, the wrath of God is coming upon the sons of disobedience, in which you yourselves once walked, when you lived in them, once walked. We don't walk in those things anymore, right? We need to be reminded of that. But now you yourselves are to put off all anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy language out of your mouth. Do not lie to one another, since you have put off the old man with his deeds, and have put on the new man, who is renewed in knowledge according to the image of Him who created him. The reality is the language there that Paul uses is this idea of putting off the old, laying aside the old. And how many know throughout the course of our lives and our walk and our journey with Christ, we have to do that, sometimes more than other times. We're going to keep taking that garment of the old person, the old man, the old ways of thinking and behaving. We've got to take that off, and then we have to put on new garments. We have to put Christ on. We have to put on his mind. We have to put on his thinking. See, it's all part of having vision. So let me ask you again, what do you see? What do you see? I hope you see something different. So we're going to cut ties with the lack of vision. And number two, we're going to cut ties with a common spirit. The opposite of a common spirit is what? Is a different spirit. What did it say about Caleb? Caleb had a different spirit. Caleb believed and saw things that others didn't. Here's what I believe. I believe anybody can live a selfish life. Anybody can. Anybody can give themselves to unhealthy appetites, the flesh. Paul refers to that part of us as the flesh. That part of us that desires things that aren't healthy for us, that God is not in. Anyone can ignore the cries of the people around them. It doesn't take any extraordinary talent or effort to do that. Anyone can spend their life in pursuit of happiness. Right? How much of our world, that is what they spend their life doing, pursuing happiness, that all elusive thing. I just want to be happy. I just want my kids to be happy. I just want the people around me to be happy. Now, of course we do, but there's this point, though, if that's all we're pursuing, then we're missing something bigger, being a part of something greater. Anyone can spend their life pursuing happiness. Anyone can save and have a massive savings account. Might just be a little bit harder for some of us, but for some of us, man, we can scrap 2 pennies together, and we've been putting it away. I mean, my uncle, Brad, my mom's brother, I remember my dad talking about my uncle. He saved his first dollar. I mean, that guy just knew how to save money. And some people, you're gifted at saving money. And you can have a massive savings account, and that's awesome. But it takes no extraordinary talent or determination. Well, I guess it does take some determination, doesn't it? And sometimes even to live for ourselves, maybe a little bit of determination. Anyone can come in on Sunday morning and warm a seat and watch the people around them engage in mission. However, it takes someone with a different kind of spirit to be devoted to Jesus and his mission. Daniel 11:32 says that those who know their God will do great exploits. Those who know their God will do great exploits. It's said that millennials and Generation Z, that you want to be a part of something bigger than yourself. You want to be a part of something where you know you're making a difference with your life. Come on, any millennials, Generation Z's in here? How many believe that's true? Well, guess what? I'm a Generation X. Guess what? I want to give myself to something bigger. I want to be part of something that's making a difference. I want to see the world become better. How many of you are part of older generations, builders and boomers? What do you want? You want your life to count. You want to see the world be a better place. So in that sense, you want to be part of something bigger than yourself. So there are a lot of people that spend a lot of time trying to distinguish how we're different from different generations. And throughout the years, there have been people who just knock on, whatever generations, coming up below them. And here's the reality. We all, in many ways, want very much the same thing. We want to make a difference. We want our lives to count. We want to change the world. So here's what we need. Here's what I believe that God's looking for. He's looking for people who can greet, who can be great hosts and serve a great cup of espresso. Those things are important, but listen, bigger than that, he's looking for missionaries. He's looking for pastors. He's looking for people who want to engage people when they walk through the doors of our church. He's looking for people who want to engage their coworker, the the lab or what do you call those little stations at work? The cubicle, right? There we go. Knew I'd get there eventually. He wants us to engage the cubicle next to us. He's looking for people who want to live on mission. He's looking for people who want to be there when someone's about ready to sign their life away. Who will take the time to sit and do nothing but listen. He's looking for people who want to walk through a horrible divorce with a couple, with an individual. He's looking for someone that is, just struggling in life, who is hopeless, who doesn't know where to turn. And when they walk through the doors of this church, that they would find you, that they would see you. Someone who's willing to be inclusive, someone who's willing to reach out, someone who's willing to invest time and energy for the kingdom. So you want to be part of something bigger than you? Here's your opportunity. There are hurting people in Gig Harbor. It doesn't look like it, but they're everywhere. What about people who want to walk through with others through hard things? What about people that care more about funding the kingdom and being generous than having a big padded savings account? Now, Pastor, you're like, don't touch that. Come on, you're talking about my money. Yeah. What if God stirred in our hearts and gave us a vision for something that was bigger than our savings account? That's what I want to be a part of. What about you? What if there were people in here that gave themselves to prayer and made a way for our neighbors and their friends as neighbors to enter into the kingdom? Because people are willing to get on their knees and do the hard work of praying for the people around them. You want to be a part of something bigger than yourself? Be someone who is like John the Baptist, who prepares the way for other people to enter into the kingdom through prayer and through sacrifice and through missions. That's what I want to be a part of. See, we're believing for people who do more than just warm a seat on Sunday, who engage in the mission. We're not looking for just people who want to keep the lights on. We're looking for people who want to live on mission, who want to see the world become a better place, who want to give of themselves for the kingdom, for the sake of the King. In the sake of hurting humanity. Be someone who has a different spirit. Be someone who's different. Be someone who spends time with Jesus. What is one of the greatest compliments, I think, in the New Testament about the disciples? Is there were some folks, some Pharisees and religious leaders, and here's what they said about the disciples. He said, these are uneducated, ordinary men, and yet we notice that they have been with Jesus. There's something dynamic about that, about being with him. So be someone who has a different spirit. And lastly, cut ties with a spirit of indifference. Spirit of indifference. Okay, by definition, indifference, it means a lack of interest. Right? So that means that we have to cut ties with a lack of interest to be engaged in kingdom things. We all realize and understand how easy it is just to allow the world around us just to get sucked up in it and to get interested in, gaming, for example. I mean, gaming it automatically grabs the attention of our youth, right? Our kids and us as adults, right? Dorinda. Right? It has a way of doing that. The thing with that is it happens, and we understand there are dynamics. There are chemical things that go on in our minds. There's the competitiveness. There's the idea of a goal, right? An outcome in mind. And so all those things go into this thing that really grabs the mind. What if our minds got grabbed by the gospel? What would that look like? To have our minds grabbed by him. Numbers 14, again, 24 says that Caleb followed God fully. It's not a picture of him half-heartedly, maybe a couple of toes in one Sunday, and then maybe a foot in the following Sunday, and then maybe nothing. The next week, it says that he was fully devoted, fully in. In Mark chapter 8, verse 34, it says, and he summoned the crowd with his disciples and said to them, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. What's so interesting about that is this statement in Mark, it comes directly after Peter. Jesus was talking about how he was going to suffer and he was going to die on a cross. And it was there that Peter said, there's no way. If I can have anything to do with it, you're not going to suffer like that. And it's there in verse 33 that Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. Listen, you don't have the interests of God in mind. You have the interests of man. Think about that. The biggest advancements for the interests of God are won not by the indifferent, not by the people who don't care, not by the people who are satisfied, not by the people who don't think about what is life supposed to look like with Jesus in the middle of it. The biggest advancements happen by people who are fully in. Now, it doesn't mean that God doesn't use all of the things that come together. For half in, I'd rather be half in. I'd rather be fully in, but, someone that's not fully in, I'd rather encourage them to get fully in. You see what I'm saying? God uses, I'm trying to make sense here, but God uses all of that, I understand, but think about the greatest advancements happen when we're fully in. So I want to ask you today, are you fully in? If not, what would that look like? Now, you might be saying you're not calling me to a radical life, are you? Am I not? Yes, I'm calling each of us to a radical Jesus life. A radical Jesus life. One in which we give ourselves to discovering His interests, living for His interests, knowing His interests, expressing His interests on the earth. A life in which we pick up our cross and we daily follow Him. It's not an easier life, but listen, it will be a lighter, more fulfilled life. A life you can know and a life that you can have. Hebrews chapter 11. Right, we have our heroes of the faith, those who conquered and did great things by faith. Listen to some of them toward the end of the chapter, verse 32 and following. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to fight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead, raised to life. Others were tortured and accepted deliverance, and not accepting deliverance that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, yes, and of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskin and goatskin, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. Of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and dens and caves of the earth, and all these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. But yet somehow they lived with vision, with a different spirit. That's their testimony. Cut ties with indifference. So, today the encouragement is to cut ties with the lack of vision, to cut ties with the common spirit, to cut ties with the spirit of indifference. If you've read the book by John Ortberg, The Life I've Always Wanted, John, I've used this example before, but he talks about in one of the churches, I don't know if he was part of his church or a church he knew, I don't remember, but he talked about Hank. And Hank was the same cranky guy, Sunday after Sunday, year after year, mad about the same things in life, had the same attitude about life, Sunday after Sunday, year after year. One of the things he talked about is Hank never changed. Hank never found a way to morph. Life of being in Jesus is about transformation. It's about morphing. It's about becoming something we couldn't become on our own. That's what we're invited into. And that's what I want to invite you into, is to be a part of that, something bigger than us, something that we can't make happen on our own. but with Jesus in the middle of it. So as we cut ties with the lack of vision, as we cut ties with the common spirit, with a spirit of indifference, I believe that we'll travel lighter, that we're more likely to live the life that Jesus said we can live because of it. So let's be people who have vision. Let's be people of a different spirit. Let's be people who are given to the interests of God and not just our own. Does it mean we completely leave behind our interests? And no. It just means, man, we're focused on his interests. Amen.